Thank you, Anindo. Thank you all here. We're very excited to share some exciting things related to mobile. We take a globalized view because here the cell phone, the smartphones is kind of like hot here, but you go to a global wide perspective, the things happened a lot 10 years ago in Tokyo, Seoul, and Shanghai. So we now take you to kind of like a globalized Asian perspective. My name is XueMingLuo, and I'm going to just give you a brief kind of background of what we are excited for. But MichelleAndrews, she's my fourth year PhD student. She can present this stuff very well. At Temple, we now have built a center, which is global center on big data and mobile analytics. So the big data, what does that mean? How big can be? So we have 100 million of mobile users. So our corporate partner is not a small business. It's one of the biggest mobile service provider in the world. So you can guess this because from China, so the Chinese companies, they have a huge amount of mobile users. So we'll only ask the 100 million from them. And we can do field experiments. And as all of us here already heard in the presentations in the morning up till now, we do geofencing, geo-targeting, and we also have crowd sensing. So we're targeting users, mobile users, not only above ground, but also underground when they take subway. So 30 minutes in transit, what do? It's a good moment for the mobile marketers to push the coupon out. So that's the research question. Michelle can do a presentation in details. We'll also do networking. By that, I mean sharing, like Facebook, Twitter, WeChats, right, on the mobile, because it's very easy to share because you have your friend in the contact list. So that's another big thing we're doing. In terms of the other big data we have is online gaming. There are 80 million of online gamers. Like very quick story, one virtual weapon can be sold for $1.5 million US. So that's just the price. That customer is not price sensitive at all. For virtual weapon, it's nothing to do with the real world. And we also have identified some interesting research questions like friending. You do friend, make gaming friends. And we also do statistics models. We partner with computer science team, statistics team, so that we can identify is this false discovery of VIP customers or not. So there's some other cool things we are trying to do. So Michelle?
Okay, so as we've seen today, some of the things marketers can do to target consumers outside their stores use geofencing, send coupons to consumers who are very close to their store. And one of the questions that came up earlier was, what about accuracy for shorter ranges? And we heard about this thing called the iBeacon, which enables stores to capitalize on low Bluetooth energy pulses emitted from any Apple iOS 7 device to send coupons very specialized about within store promotions. In this case, we have shoes, and it'll even give you a map of where you can go to find those shoes. And Major League Baseball stadiums, for example, are considering using iBeacon to help spectators find their seats better within the next year. Now, one of the things about these technologies is they're really only leveraging geo-targeting. But we know that mobile technology is really unique, as we've all seen, because we all bring the mobile phone to bed with us. We carry it everywhere. And so what that suggests is that marketers can also target consumers in real time. And that kind of provides the motive for the first study that I'm going to talk about today is we're interested in looking at, well, what if you combine these two targeting strategies, geo-targeting and temporal targeting? What are the effects? And to do this, what we do is we run a large randomized field experiment by sending text messages promoting IMAX movie theater tickets to over 12,000 consumers in a large city in China. And the consumers had never purchased IMAX theater tickets on their mobile device before, which we ensured because with the company we were working with, we created a brand new mobile app. So basically, the message you would have received if you were in this city and you were randomly sampled in Chinese was, if you want to watch a movie this Saturday at 4 p.m. for a reduced price, download this app, you can reserve your seat, and the charge would be billed to your monthly phone bill immediately. So to do this, again, we're looking at the effects of temporal targeting and geo-targeting. So for temporal targeting, we sent the message at 3 different times. The movie showed on a Saturday at 4 o'clock, so we sent it on a Friday, on a Thursday, as well as a Saturday at 2 o'clock. And this is a between subject experiment, so mobile users only received 1 message. We also are looking at the effects of geo-targeting. So we did 3 different distances from the IMAX theater. Specifically, we said, okay, near distances, we'll cap at 200 meters. This is because cell phone towers, for micro towers, only have a range of about 200 meters. Then for medium distances, we defined it as being between 200 and 500 meters. And for far distances, we also capped it at 2 kilometers to be able to really see effects of this experiment. Okay, so what did we also controlled for different things like theaters. We selected 4 different theaters to make sure we weren't seeing effects of just theater preference. The different rate plans that mobile users had, because we got that information from our corporate sponsor, as well as users' mobile usage behaviors, so their monthly phone bills, how many calls they made, their messages, and their data usage. So what do we find? Well, first, when we look at just the effects, So when we did this experiment, our response rate was over 7%, which isn't really high, but it's not bad compared to the average mobile click-through rates in Asia. And we find when we just look at temporal targeting, that targeting has a negative sales lead time relationship, meaning that messages were most effective when they were sent on Saturday. When we look at just the effects of geo-targeting, we also find, as literature has already shown, that messages sent closest to the movie theater were most effective, as our chi-squares showed. But when we look at the effects of the combination of temporal and geo-targeting, we find that it's a bit more complicated. This is what we find. So I'll walk us through this. So at near distances, we find that same-day messages are the most effective. And again, we see that negative sales lead time relationship. But at far distances, when messages are sent on a Saturday, so 2 hours before the movie, there's not as high of a purchase rate, which makes sense. However, giving consumers too much time, in this case, sending the messages on a Thursday, 2 days before the movie, wasn't as effective either. So in this case, giving consumers just the right amount of time at a far distance was the most effective. So we see this curvilinear relationship for non-proximal distances. And then if we look at just these, on this chart, the green bars, so sending messages to everybody 2 days ahead of time had about the same effects across distances, suggesting that it's not just about giving people enough time. It really is about this combination, taking this into consideration. When we break this down even further and we try to look at our consumers based on a function of where they were when they received the messages, we also see different effects. So namely, we can tell whether consumers were in the shopping district, or in primarily the residential district, or were in a commercial district. And so we find that shoppers are most likely to go ahead and buy the movie tickets, followed by people in the residential district. And we also see the same thing occurring where we have a negative sales lead time relationship for messages sent at proximal distances, and that for non-proximal distances, this curvilinear relationship is robust across distances. We also see that people are least likely to respond at work, which makes sense. Hopefully you are working. So, quick summary of this first study. Basically, what we suggest is that if marketers want to combine temporal and geo-targeting, they really need to be conscious that the effects aren't very simple. They're more complicated. For near distances, you're going to have a negative sales lead time relationship. But for far distances, the effects of targeting are curvilinear. And that, in this case, customer context matters. Perhaps what customers are doing. If they're shopping or if they're at home, that might drive some of the variation we see in our results. Now, in this study, we targeted consumers above ground using tower technology. As XueMing was suggesting, we also can target consumers below ground, specifically in the subway. This is because in a lot of cities, well, not a lot, but it's a growing number, in this case in Asia and some cities in Europe, subway tunnels are starting to equip their tunnels with subway-specific mobile technology, not just at the base station, but actually along the subway tunnel lines, so commuters can use their cell phones in a similar fashion as if they were above ground. So in our next study, which is joint work with Aninda here at NYU, we are looking at whether it's a good idea for marketers to target consumers when they're in a crowd. So in this case, when you take the subway, especially if you take it during rush hour, a lot of times you might be in a crowd. And we know from prior literature that crowding can lead to stress, hostile behaviors, avoidance behaviors. So generally, crowding has been characterized as having negative effects on consumers. And what we find when we ran this study is that crowding can actually have a positive effect. So what do I mean by this? In the 2 field experiments which we ran, which I'll describe in a second, we find that crowding can actually boost consumers' likelihood of making a mobile purchase. The corporate partner which we worked with conducted a follow-up telephone study calling people who received the SMS that we sent them and who made purchases, but also calling people who received the SMS and didn't make purchases, and asking them various questions which were embedded in a customer satisfaction survey. And the results from this follow-up telephone survey indicate that in crowded situations, in this case on the subway, people feel a loss of personal space. And to psychologically cope, they immerse themselves in their mobile, which leads to a higher involvement in their mobile, and then a greater purchase likelihood of any incoming promotional messages. Okay, so more specifically, how did we do this? Well, we sent SMS messages to subway passengers using the subway-specific technology, and we sent it to during 5 different times of the day to try to capture effects of time cycles and various trains. We also did it on the weekday and the weekend because it's logical to expect that crowding is going to differ whether it's a workday or a weekend. And we pushed the SMS, so 2 days, 28 trains, but we pushed it only from one station, namely the 4th subway station, for 2 reasons. First, we wanted to make sure that there were enough commuters on the train for commuters to feel a sense of crowdedness, which is more likely on the 4th stop instead of the 1st stop, but we wanted to make sure that they received the message early enough along their journey so that they still had time to respond to it. And we only pushed the message to trains that were going into the city. And our targeted subway population was people who had not received the promotion that we were running. And again, we randomly sampled from all the mobile users. And we sent it to over 10,000 mobiles. So as I explained earlier, if this is the subway, along the tunnel walls is mobile technology, and we're able to know exactly how many passengers are in the subway car by seeing how many mobiles are automatically connected to this subway technology. So more specifically, to measure crowdedness, we infer passenger volume from the number of mobiles who are connected to this cell phone line. And in this case, in the city in which we ran the experiment, over 70% of the mobile users are clients of the corporate partner that we were working with. And the train had 6 cars. It was an articulated train, so there were no doors. Traffic can flow freely from one end of the car to the other end. We knew the exact dimensions of the car, and so we calculate crowdedness using all these variables. And our response rate was about 3.22%. We know our wireless user behavior statistics, which I had mentioned earlier. And this is what we find. So weekday, weekend. So for example, if we look at a 2 o'clock, a train leaving from between the 2 and 4 o'clock on the weekday, we see that crowdedness is about 1.91 passengers per square meter. Yet on the weekend, it's about 3.2, a lot higher, which makes sense. If we look at this pictorially, and we break it down even more, this is what we find. Looking at crowd density as a base rate, so just about 1 to 2 passengers per square meter, we find that there is purchase rates, but when crowd density increases up to about 3 to 4 passengers per square meter, so does purchase rate likelihood. In this case, almost 15%. When crowd density is even higher, so in this case just 5 passengers per square meter, we find that it increases up to 50%. And these results are robust to the various models we ran. Okay, I'm going to pause for 1 second. By a show of hands, how many people have taken the subway, or if you call it the metro, within the last week? Most of us. Okay. Did your experience on the subway look like this? This is in Tokyo, where pushers, it's their official name, were actually hired to make sure they get as many sardines into the subway as possible. The reason I show this picture is because we didn't find a crowd density so high that it would be practically impossible to use your mobiles. But it is logical to maybe see that we're going to have this tapering effect. So one of the things about this study is we randomized, so we randomly sampled from all the mobile users. But the thing is, there's always a concern of endogeneity. And so to control for this, what we were able to do is we were lucky enough that in the city in which we ran this experiment, on a certain day, the police created a traffic control. So basically they halted traffic above ground because they were doing a high security escort. Denizens were not forewarned, so they wouldn't know which routes to bomb. And so because they were not forewarned and this was unexpected, that forced many people to take the subway, creating a variation in crowdedness. And only about 2 subway lines were affected, and so we targeted, during this 1 hour traffic control, we targeted subway commuters in these 2 stations to try to see if our results hold even in this situation. And in this case, we took a new product, we advertised a new product, streaming mobile videos on your phone, and we had a smaller sample size because again, it was only 2 stations that were affected. And we have about a 2.91% purchase rate. And we find again that yes, indeed, the higher the crowd, also the higher the purchase rate. So one of the cool things about working with a mobile partner is that they agreed to do a follow-up survey, and they actually used their own call centers to call various respondents who had received the SMS, in particular those who had made a purchase of the promotion we were advertising, but also those who didn't. And as I had mentioned earlier, they did it in a customer satisfaction survey, and embedded in this survey to try to disguise the true purpose of the survey were questions about, where were you when you purchased this promotion, those kind of things, to try to make them remember that their crowdedness of their environment. And the survey generally suggests that crowdedness leads people to just become more involved in their mobile, to be more immersed in their mobile. Therefore, there's higher mobile involvement and higher purchase rate likelihood. So quick summary, key takeaways of what these 2 studies have shown. That when you engage in geo and temporal targeting, the effects are nonlinear. So you can combine the 2 strategies, but be careful. The second thing we find is that context matters. As we've been discussing all day, context matters. In this case, consumers were on the go, they were in transit during the commute, and they were in a crowded situation. We found that crowd can have a positive effect on mobile purchases. There may be other situations where it actually has a negative effect. And then in another study we're doing, which I'm out of time so I won't discuss, but targeting consumers' psychological attachment to things, whether that has effects. So thank you very much for your time.